Okay, welcome back. So now we're going to continue. We were just discussing the economic reasons behind the fertility transition, right? So we want to understand why, 300 years ago, women on average have, let's say, 6 or 7 kids, and now they have 1 or 2, right? So that's we want to understand. Now, the income and substitution effects mechanism is this. Okay, so income and substitution effects. Okay. So as I just said, economists assume children gives utility, right? Now, if you start as an economist, if you start thinking about children as normal goods, right? So, so if you want to put, some consumption goods into the story, let's say CK, and then if you want to put the number of kids you have, the number of, let's say, surviving kids into your utility function, then you start, as an economist again, you start thinking about the costs of fertility, right? The costs. Now, typically, there are 2 types of costs. One is the time cost, and the other is, let's say, goods cost, right? So you want to feed the kid, you want to buy certain stuff that your children would need, and also you want to spend some time with them, right? This is starting with the pregnancy, of course, for the woman, right? And then for both the mother and the father, but typically in traditional societies, for mother, there is a huge time cost. Most of the time, in most of the cases, in many societies, mother would be the main caregiver. This is not, of course, a certain thing, because if you look at the Scandinavian countries, I mean, Finland, Norway, and in some of the other Western countries, you also observe that fathers actually take some time off from the labor market. But in many cases, there's a time cost and there is a goods cost. Okay. Now, income and substitution effects enter the picture here. Okay. Now, what do we know about the income effect? If income is getting larger, right? All of the goods are consumed more, right? Now, suppose that there is a change in the cost of fertility. Okay. Now, if the cost of fertility changes, there will be an income effect, all right? Because other goods, let's say the time cost of fertility is high. Okay, let's formalize the discussion in this way. Let's suppose that the time cost of fertility is increasing. Now, this creates 2 effects, right? Income effect, all goods are becoming relatively cheaper, right? And there is the substitution effect. Now, the problem is that the time cost of fertility increases when your wage increases, right? Because now, if you have to take care of the kid during the pregnancy until the kid reaches 1 year of age, etc., 2 years of age, then that type of cost would be larger if your wage is larger, or if your occupation would be giving you many good benefits, things like that, right? Now, if wages were high, then substitution effect dominates the income effect, right? Because income effect makes all the goods all the goods less expensive, right? Because now you have relatively higher income. But in the meantime, there is a substitution effect if your wage is sufficiently large, all right? So economists then argue when countries get richer and richer, right? Suppose that GDP per capita is increasing in time. This means in this economy, normally real wages would also be increasing in the long run, right? So this means time cost of fertility is getting larger and larger, and that would imply substitution effect would dominate the income effect. Okay? As a result, fertility could be decreasing, okay? Because women or people more generally have good opportunities outside the household, right? Outside the house, yes, they want to have kids, but now the opportunity cost is there, right? So instead of having 6 kids, maybe 2 is okay. After having the kids, you again concentrate on your career. Okay, you concentrate on your education. For instance, you want to pursue a PhD study. All right. So one type of explanation is then that substitution effect dominates income effect if wages large enough. As a result, we observe in richer economies when income is large, total fertility rate is lower. Okay, so that's one type of economic explanation behind the fertility transition. The other explanation, the third one, is the resource transfers, especially from children to parents. Now, there are 2 important mechanisms here. One is child labor, and the other is old age security hypothesis. Oops. Old age security hypothesis. Now, why child labor is important? Imagine a poor economy. So what do we know from economic development? In poor economies, we observe a higher likelihood of being them agricultural economies, right? And in agriculture, it is easier for kids to serve as workers, right? So poor rural economies, if you think about these poor rural economies, child labor is an important source of income for the households, okay? Child labor, especially in agriculture. Then you would imagine that the return of having a lot of kids would be larger if the economy is largely agrarian. Okay, and imagine the typical rural setting. Household size is larger. The extended family live together with many kids, and after some certain age, for instance, after let's say age 7, right, you start working, putting these kids to work in the field. So that creates an incentive for higher fertility. Then what we observe, well, of course, if the structural transformation continues, right, the labor share of agriculture, let's say, or the GDP share of agriculture, so the share of agriculture in the economy decreases, let's say, then in the meantime, we would imagine that total fertility also would decrease because the child labor now is not really an important component of the return of fertility. Now, the second reason regarding this resource transfers, so here, of course, there's a resource transfer from children to the parents because the child works for free, right, in the agricultural sector. Now, the other reason is what we call the old age security hypothesis, right? And to understand that, we want to think of one thing. Again, the economy will be poor and without developed financial markets. Okay, so this is a poor economy that we imagine now, and in this economy, the financial markets and the financial derivatives are not that developed. It is very difficult. This means it is very difficult for people to lend and borrow financial resources. Okay, and in that respect, it is of course difficult for people to transfer their resources to the future. Why would they be interested in the future? Because in the future they will be old aged, right? They will be retired, and once they get retired, they need some source of income to care for themselves, right? Now, in the modern society, we have social security systems, right? So in the modern society, young people save, or young people pay pensions, right? The social security premium for their old age. So there's a centrally planned mechanism there, and there's a financial market there. So once you start paying your pension premium, your social security premium, that authority, whatever authority that is, it could be private, public, but that authority invests that money, put that money into some financial assets. So those assets become a fund. So that fund eventually, is used for your pension salary, right? Once you get retired. But if you do not have such a developed or modern social security systems, or more generally, if you do not have such advanced financial markets, such developed and deep financial markets, then you may imagine, okay, I should have many kids. Why? Because they will take care of me in the future. They will be working, and when I get retired, they would be still at the working age, so they would earn income in the labor market, and then they would take care of me. They would transfer resources, not just today, as in the case of child labor, but in the future as well when I get retired. So again, what do we observe is that when countries get richer, they also have higher financial development. Okay? Higher financial development. Then we observe again total fertility rate should decrease. Okay? So that's the third general mechanism, and the second that economists actually sign up for. All right? So one is child labor, resource transfers from children to parents in poor agricultural economies. And then the other is the old age security hypothesis, because people would tend to have many kids if they want to secure themselves in the retirement. Okay? So in the case of child labor, it is today's transfers. In the case of old age security, it is futures. Now, the last reason is the quality-quantity trade-off. And in the last few decades, this is the preferred overall, among economists, this is the most popular explanation that is kind of empirically more more plausible according to some statistical research. Okay, and the idea is this: when you have children and when you spend time and money for these kids, it is not just it doesn't stop there, right? Because you also want these kids to have better education and better health. Okay. More generally, you want to leave them perhaps some bequest. Okay. So the idea behind the quality-quantity trade-off is more generally this. Maybe I can explain this using a particular framework. Okay. Now, what you see here is a utility function, and T here denotes generations. Okay, so when I say T, let's say the generation T is the generation of adults, and generation T plus 1 is the generation of their kids, okay, children. So what do you see here? Well, CT, let's say, is the consumption of adults, okay? And NT, let's say, is the number of kids. Let's put a parameter here, which is usually there, beta, okay, and usually it is between 0 and 1. I will not discuss that. You know, it can be also a function of fertility as well. So there are many different models in that regard, but the main idea is this. So people in this generation, in generation T, adults of this generation, they care about their consumption. Yes, they care about the number of kids they have. They want to have kids, but they also care about their kids' welfare. Okay, and here, of course, we are assuming a dynasty, right? So these are dynastic preferences. Why dynastic? Because we kind of force that the type of welfare between the mother and the daughter, right, would be similar. So these are dynastic preferences. But what does it tell you? Well, to create higher welfare for my kid, there are some different ways of doing that, right? If I educate my kid, if I make good health spending, sufficient health spending for my kid, if I leave my kid some bequest, then we would be larger. Okay. The problem is that there is a budget constraint, right? So suppose that for each kid you have, you make an education spending, you make an health spending, okay, and you leave some bequest, okay, let's say capital sum. Then this total is limited. So then you face a trade-off, right? You want to maximize this thing, but there are some mechanisms that, you know, that would imply larger value of V, right? But then if you have too many kids, the total amount of education spending, total amount of health spending, and total amount of bequest that you can leave would be limited. Okay, so that is the trade-off, right? So more generally, the trade-off is more educated, healthier, and richer kids versus many uneducated, not really healthy kids, not really healthy and poor kids. Okay, so that's the trade-off. So you can increase the quantity of your kids because that's a simple technology. You have sex, you do not use contraceptives. If you are sufficiently lucky, I think it is 20% or something like that for each, each menstruation cycle, you have the kid. But if you also care about the quality of your kids, in terms of, the quality means their prospective welfare when they get adults, okay, then you think of, okay, maybe I do not need to know, I do not need to have 5 kids with, not very great education, not really good health, and leaving them nothing. Maybe I would have just 2 kids, but I can send them to a good school. I can give them, sufficiently nutritious goods, sufficiently nutritious food, and maybe I can leave them some. I can leave them some, some money as a form of bequest, so they would have higher chances in life to attain a higher welfare. Okay, so but what does this imply? Well, this implies if economies get richer and richer again, so you would have even more incentivized to spend more on education, more on health, and you want to incentivize to leave those kids, more money or assets. Why? Because now you can actually do it. So it is like a two-way causation, right? If you get more educated and healthier as a cohort, then you become more productive through human capital. We're gonna discuss these things next week. But then if you get richer and richer, you also have more income, right? So what I mean is this. So let me use a clean page. So the constraint, if the constraint is like this, so for each kid you make an education spending, a health spending, and you leave some bequest. So this is education spending, let's say. This is health spending, and this is bequest. Okay, so this total must be equal to WT, right? So under certain preferences, of course, that depends on the utility function as well, right? So VT, that depends on stuff. But if WT is larger under certain cases, you may want to imagine decreasing NT and increasing ET, HT, and BT. Okay, so of course, once again, it depends on the preferences, because preferences also explain the income effect, substitution effect, etc. But that would be the typical result. All right. So up to this point, then we have a rich understanding of the mortality transition, because mortality transition is because of standards of living increases, public health measure improvements, and advances in medicine. Then mortality keeps decreasing, and people then react to this mortality change because they do care about their surviving number of kids, not the total number of births, right? I mean, giving a birth is a painful thing for the mother, right? So we don't really care about that. What we care about is how many kids we have as surviving adults, right? So if we have lower mortality, then we lower our fertility, our desired fertility, right? So then there's also a set of economic mechanisms, right? If you have a higher wage, then your labor market prospects is better, right? So as a mother or a father, you may want to limit your fertility and earn a lot of income to do what? Well, to spend, to make some spending on the education and the health of the kid, for instance. Or you realize that it is no longer an agricultural economy. So child labor is a humanitarian problem as well, right? So because children should spend their time in school. But sorry, so in reality, of course, it's not the case, right? Because people need money. But overall, we have a very good understanding in today's economic demography. So the field is called economic demography. So we have a pretty clear understanding of this phenomenon. Okay. So this is fertility, again, this is mortality. So demographic transition could make sense a lot. So we have, if we go back, so we have a production function. In that production function, we have capital, we have labor, and if we write this production function this way, as in the last week, from this we find GDP per worker. Okay, so the GDP per worker would be written in this way, where capital per worker is this, and then you of course derive your fundamental equation, fundamental differential equation, and remember that that fundamental differential equation was this, right? So S, alpha, and delta would be parameters. So S is the saving rate, alpha is the curvature of the the production function, so it is the capital income share more specifically, and delta is the depreciation rate, and N would be the population growth rate. But now, so population growth rate is N, right? But now we understand that population growth rate is not fixed, right? So in the simple model, it was fixed, right? But now we know that it was nearly zero, right? It was nearly zero, but then there was this mortality and fertility transitions. So the distance between them, starting with nearly zero, then it became positive and decreased again. Okay? So our model was what? Remember, the steady state. So in the simple model, we draw this, right? This is KT. This is S, KT alpha. And this was what? M plus delta KT, right? Now, N is changing. Okay? So initially, we have small n, right? So let's say small n is here before the transition. And then that curve move up, right? Move up, defines new steady states. So this is, let's say, maximum n. And then it goes back, so it moves this direction. Each time defines new steady states, and then historically, it moves back again. Okay. So in the simple Solow model, when we assume that n is fixed, right? With Solow model with fixed n is a very simple model in that regard. Okay. So if you want to extend this, of course, we have to write a richer theory that explains population growth rate as a function of some stuff, such as income and other stuff. Okay? Or, I mean, in that particular solo model, of course, you may imagine that this is explained by a function of capital stock, right? So this could be actually very interesting. Suppose that population growth rate is a function of capital stock. So what do we know? Well, in poor economies, it will be near zero. If economy becomes richer and richer, it will decrease again, right? So if that's the case, how would you draw this figure? So again, there is the production function, right? But now you have something different. So you want to draw NKT times KT. Okay, so how will it look like? So it will be increasing and in a convex manner. So this multiplication would add you some convexity. So maybe you would have something like this. Okay, so let me push this idea a little bit further. Okay, let me push this idea a little bit further with a clearer graph. So the production function is there. This is S KT alpha. Now we are extending the solo model with a population growth function like this. Okay. So instead of this, this was the fixed N model. Okay, instead of this, we might have something like that. Okay. So, okay, this is not very nice. So maybe we would have something like that. Okay. Now, what do you see? Well, there are two steady states now, right? Two steady states with K1 star and K2 star. And if you want to draw them, so if you want to draw K dot, what do you have? Well, it remains negative, and goes like this, right? So this is K1 star, and this is K2 star. Once again, this is stable, but this is unstable, right? K1 is unstable. So models could be extended, as you see, by making population growth endogenous, right? So this blue one, be careful again. So this blue one would be NKT plus delta KT, okay? So today, there are many different models with endogenous demography or endogenous NT. One very nice paper is by Barrow and Becker, 1988. You may also check Becker, Murphy, and Tamura's model. Becker, Murphy, and Tamura. This is 1990 Journal of Political Economy. So of course these papers are technical, but you may look at the introduction or conclusion to get the main idea behind endogenous fertility models. Okay, but the idea is that so the key idea is this: population growth rate was not fixed. Okay, since population growth rate was not fixed, it depended on, so remember, employment divided by labor force is one ratio. Labor force divided by population in the working age people is one ratio. Population in the working age years divided by population is another ratio, right? Now this part critically depends on fertility and mortality, right? And this part critically depends on education. Again, education and demography, because people can get married and leave the labor force. And this part is mainly demography. Okay. So this part is not that really interesting from our perspective. But now we got these reasons well, and we also understand if people become more educated, they earn more money. If they earn more money, they have fewer kids. And then they also spend more money on their kids' education. Now, let me pause here again. We have another session. If you have a very quick question, I can answer it. Otherwise, we're gonna meet again at 2:50 and continue. Yes, Betül, go ahead.
Why is K1 is not stable?
I will explain that after the break, okay? All right, so let's meet at 2:50 and continue with our third session. Bye-bye.